My name is Alma Walker. I'm 32 years old. And this is the story of how the people closest to me tried to bury me in shame, only for me to rise from the ruins with something they would never, ever touch. It started on a gray October morning, the kind that already felt like a funeral. I sat in a cramped Denver law office, knees pressed together, palms damp with sweat. The air smelled like dust and stale coffee, and the light that crept through the blinds cast sharp shadows across the floor. I was quiet, small, in my worn cardigan and cracked leather flats, just the way my family always preferred me to be. Next to me, my brother Ethan Walker leaned back like a man who owned the world. 35, dressed in tailored navy with slicked back hair and that infuriating smirk always lingering on his lips. Ethan, the investment broker. Ethan, the family's golden child. Ethan, who hadn't seen our grandmother once in her final year. Yet here he was, confident as ever, arms folded, tapping his Rolex against the armrest. Across from us, Attorney Jackson, a thin, aging man with glasses always on the verge of falling off, cleared his throat and began reading Grandma Grace's will. The apartment in downtown Chicago went to Ethan. Prime real estate. Easily $1 million, if not more. I felt my throat tighten. I knew this day was coming. Still, it hurt like a fresh bruise. Ethan chuckled beside me and leaned in with a whisper meant to be heard. Don't pout, Alma. Maybe you'll get a cookbook or one of those ugly brooches she used to wear. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard it tasted like iron. I didn't respond. Then came the unexpected. And the wooden house in Springwood Village, Jackson continued, along with all the land it sits on, is to be passed to Miss Alma Walker. I blinked. Springwood? That rundown, forgotten village buried deep in the mountains? Ethan burst out laughing. Oh, come on. You mean that shack in the woods? He turned to me and grinned, wide and gleaming. Well, at least you got something, Alma. Better start practicing how to swing an axe. Hope you're good at collecting firewood. Even the lawyer cracked a subtle wince at the cruelty. But I didn't say a word. I didn't cry. I simply nodded and collected the documents Jackson handed me, signed papers, the deed, the directions. Congratulations, Ethan added as he stood. Make sure the squirrels don't chew up your inheritance. He left with the smug air of a man who believed he had just won everything. I stayed in that cold office a moment longer, staring at the folders in my lap like they were bricks stacked on my chest. All I had left was this decaying house I hadn't seen in years. A place that lived only in vague childhood memories. When I stepped outside, my husband Ryan was waiting on the curb, leaning against our aging Ford with crossed arms and a clenched jaw. His first words weren't kind. So? You get the apartment? I shook my head. No. Ethan did. His eyes narrowed. What did you get? I hesitated. The house. In Springwood. His mouth twisted in disgust. That place? That dump in the middle of nowhere? It's what Grandma left me, Ryan. He slammed the door shut and marched away from me. You're a damn embarrassment, Alma. Always have been. Even your own grandmother knew you weren't worth anything real. Don't do this, I whispered, begging for something I didn't even know anymore. But he was already inside the car. And by the time I reached the door, he locked it from the inside. I knocked softly, but he didn't look at me. Just sat there, stone-faced, before starting the engine and driving off. He didn't come back. That night, I slept on the porch of a friend who didn't ask questions. The next morning, with my grandmother's deed in one hand and a worn-out suitcase in the other, I left Denver. I spent the last of my savings on a bus ticket to Springwood. I didn't look back. I had nothing left to return to. The bus ride was long and quiet. As the gray city melted into farmland, and farmland into dense mountain trees, I stared out the window with a hollow heart. The name Springwood used to sound sweet to me as a girl. Grandma Grace always said it like a lullaby. But now, it sounded like the setup to a cruel punchline. When the bus finally stopped, the village felt like something out of a forgotten novel. Dusty. Cold. Empty. There were barely any lights in the windows, and the trees were more skeletal than standing. And then I saw it. Grandma's house. It stood crooked on the hill. Weather-beaten. Its porch half-fallen. A rusted gate hung off one hinge like a broken jaw. Weeds taller than my waist had swallowed the yard whole. It looked like a place that had given up. But I hadn't. I dragged my suitcase up the gravel path, my breath fogging in the air. The wooden steps creaked as I ascended, each one sounding like it might collapse under my weight. At the door, I hesitated. Then I pushed. It groaned open. And what greeted me wasn't quite what I'd expected. It wasn't destroyed. The house was old, yes, but not abandoned. It had been kept. In its own quiet way. White sheets covered the furniture. The air smelled of thyme and cedar, not mold. There were no broken windows, no rodents scurrying. The wooden floors, though worn, were swept clean. It was as if someone had prepared the house for my arrival. Like it had been waiting for me. I stepped further in, flashlight trembling in my hand. The beam lit up the walls, wood-paneled, lined with old photos. Grandma in her garden. A black and white portrait of her as a young woman, holding a baby, me. I felt something tighten in my chest. Was this her plan all along? I explored deeper. The kitchen had ceramic jars still sealed. The table had a clean tablecloth, its corners weighed down by tiny river stones. The stairs creaked under my feet as I climbed to the second floor, but they held. In the smallest room at the end of the hall, I found a folded quilt at the foot of the bed. My quilt. The one she made for me when I was 8, embroidered with stars. I sat on that bed and cried, not out of grief, but out of something else. Something harder to name. The feeling of being seen. Of being chosen. She gave the apartment to Ethan. But she gave me this. A place to belong. A secret yet to be unlocked. And I was about to find out why. I didn't sleep that first night. How could I? Every shadow whispered. Every creak of the old house felt like breath on my neck. But it wasn't fear that kept me awake. It was the strange, overwhelming sense that I was meant to be there, that something waited for me inside those walls. At around 3 a.m., I got up and wandered back down to the living room. The flashlight's weak beam caught a glint of metal under the bookshelf. I bent down and pulled the bookcase slightly forward. Tucked behind it was a small, handleless wooden door, almost invisible if you didn't know where to look. My pulse quickened. I pressed my fingers into the tiny groove and pushed. It gave way with a soft click. Behind it? A narrow, dust-coated staircase that descended into blackness. I hesitated, every instinct screaming to wait until daylight, but curiosity outweighed caution. I descended slowly, one shaky footstep at a time, the beam from my flashlight trembling against the walls. At the bottom, I froze. A room. A full room, buried under the house. Bookshelves covered every inch of the wall. Thick tomes bound in leather, some cracked with age, others protected in worn velvet or wax paper. I took one down, heart pounding. A first edition of Common Sense by Thomas Paine. Another shelf revealed a collection of handwritten journals in delicate cursive. Latin. French. Even Arabic titles were present. It wasn't just a library. It was a vault of history. And suddenly, the mockery I had endured, the apartment, the laughter, the way Ryan spat "you're useless," none of it mattered. Because I was standing in something priceless. Something sacred. Something no one else had been trusted with. The cold room hummed with meaning, like it had been waiting for someone to hear its story. I walked slowly through the aisles, my fingers grazing the books, the old wooden boxes labeled in Grandma's handwriting, Land Grants, 1893. Letters from Samuel Walker. Wills, pre-1900. And then I saw it. A black safe. Dust-covered. Thick. Iron. The dial was worn smooth, but not broken. I reached out and placed my fingers on it. My first thought was irrational, but also, somehow, right. My birthday. Grandma always said September 17th was the day her life changed. She never missed it. She never let anyone else bake the cake or wrap the gift. Maybe it wasn't just sentiment. I entered the numbers. The lock gave a click so soft I thought I imagined it. My heart pounded as I pulled the heavy door open. Inside were papers. Dozens of them. Documents tied with faded ribbons. Photographs in plastic sleeves. And at the very top, a stack of yellowed envelopes bound tightly with twine. The first one read, "To Alma, open when you're ready." I sat on the floor, breath catching in my throat. The room was still and silent, but it felt like her presence wrapped around me like a shawl. I opened the first letter. Her handwriting hadn't changed. Slanted, elegant, the kind of cursive you don't see anymore. "My dearest Alma," it began, "if you're reading this, you've chosen to stay. That means everything. This house has been in our family for over 100 years. But more than that, it holds knowledge, stories, history. I didn't give it to Ethan, because Ethan would never understand. But you always listened. You always saw what others missed." Tears slid silently down my cheeks. Letter after letter, she told me the stories of our ancestors. Of how my great-great-grandfather helped settle Springwood, building not only homes but community schools. She wrote about how generations of Walkers had quietly preserved knowledge, books saved from war, letters from immigrants, ledgers of birth and loss and resilience. And how she, in her later years, had taken it upon herself to preserve it all when others in the family wanted to clean up the past. Then came the final line. "You are the last keeper, Alma. Protect it. Study it. Let the world see what we came from and who we are. This is your purpose." The tears wouldn't stop now. I sat there until sunrise, surrounded by her words, her legacy, her love. And for the first time in my entire life, I felt whole. Like I wasn't broken. Like I wasn't some leftover that got handed the scraps. I wasn't less. I was more. When I finally emerged upstairs, the house looked different. Not newer, but awake. Like it had taken a breath with me. That afternoon, I took a long walk into the village, still hugging my coat against the chill. Springwood was quiet, almost forgotten. A handful of shops lined the narrow main road, a diner, a hardware store, a small grocer. I asked around for help with repairs and was pointed to a man named Harold, the town's go-to handyman. Harold was in his 60s, white hair tucked under a dusty cap, his hands calloused but steady. When he came out to the house and took one long look around, he nodded and said, "This place has got bones. Real ones. It ain't dead yet." He agreed to help, starting with the roof. Each day afterward, I worked. I swept. I dusted. I fixed broken shutters and polished doorknobs. I cleaned the windows, letting sunlight pour in after years of gloom. Every floorboard I repaired, every crack I sealed, felt like reclaiming something Ethan never saw. Something Ryan never bothered to learn. I wasn't just rebuilding a house. I was rebuilding myself. Then, 1 week later, I got a call. "Ethan." I almost didn't answer. But I did. "Hey, Alma," he said casually, like nothing had ever happened. I was thinking about our little inheritance situation. I said nothing. I mean, that apartment's already a headache. HOA fees, traffic, you know. And I thought, maybe we can trade. You get the apartment. I'll take that house off your hands. I almost laughed. But I didn't. Instead, I paused. Let the silence stretch. Then I said, calmly, no. There was a beat. No. That house means something to me, Ethan. You don't get to own everything just because it's shiny. He scoffed. Come on. You're passing up $1 million deal to live in the woods like a pioneer? Don't be stupid. I smiled to myself. I'm not the one who's blind, Ethan. Then I hung up. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt no guilt. No fear. Just clarity. This wasn't just my grandmother's house. It was her test. And I was finally proving I was ready for it. After that call with Ethan, something shifted inside me. It was like the last thread tying me to the old version of myself had finally snapped. The quiet girl in the background. The one who never spoke up at family dinners. The one Ryan ignored and Ethan ridiculed. That Alma was gone. What remained was someone stronger. Someone who had found not just a house, but a calling. I spent the next several days working alongside Harold. We patched the roof, fixed the drafty windows, and cleaned out the overgrown yard. Harold wasn't much of a talker, but every now and then, he'd glance at me, nod, and say, "You're doing good work here, Miss Alma." Those few words meant more to me than all of Ethan's so-called compliments in 30 years. But it wasn't just the house that was waking up. It was the town. At first, the villagers watched me with caution. Outsiders didn't usually stay in Springwood, especially not ones returning to a haunted house, as a few kids whispered behind their bikes. But over time, their wariness softened. Mrs. Mary from the grocer started leaving small bags of fruit at my gate. Mr. George, a carpenter well into his 70s, offered to help me reinforce the shelves in the basement. Even the schoolteacher, a shy woman named Nia, stopped by with old photos of Springwood from the town archive, saying softly, "Your grandmother helped build the first literacy circle here, did you know that?" I didn't. But I was learning. Every day, I uncovered more of who Grandma Grace truly was. And the house, the house, it was like a time capsule wrapped in stories. The secret library downstairs became my sanctuary. I cataloged each book with delicate care, documenting the publication dates, authors, languages. Some were centuries old. A few were first editions I knew belonged in a museum. But I wasn't ready to let them go. One chilly morning, while dusting a stack of letters from the 1880s, I found another envelope addressed to me. It had been tucked behind a ledger, likely hidden there intentionally. This one was short. "Alma, if you find this, you're close to the final secret. There's more beneath the house. But it's not about gold or wealth. It's about the truth. Follow the roots." I stared at the words for a long time. Follow the roots? It sounded like a riddle, but I remembered the maple tree outside, the one Grandma had planted when she was young. I rushed upstairs and out the front door, heart pounding. The old maple stood tall, its leaves nearly all gone, the trunk thick and twisted. And then I saw it. A faint circle of disturbed soil near its base. Weeds had grown over it, but something was there. I grabbed a small spade and started digging. Not too deep beneath the surface, my shovel hit something solid. Wood. Carefully, I unearthed what looked like a wooden box. Old, nailed shut, worn with time. I lifted it out with trembling hands and carried it back into the house. Once inside, I pried it open using a screwdriver from Harold's toolkit. Inside? Bundles of wrapped papers, several old photographs, and, most shocking, a small, cloth-covered book. I picked it up carefully. It was a journal. And the name on the first page stopped my breath. Samuel Walker. My great-great-grandfather. The writing inside was faint, but legible. The entries dated back to the late 1800s. Samuel wrote of escaping persecution, of building a life from nothing in a country that didn't want him to succeed. He documented injustices faced by black families in the region, land theft, violence, officials looking the other way. One entry in particular sent a chill down my spine. They took the North Fields. Said the deed was invalid because I couldn't possibly read. Grace said we must stay quiet. But someday, someone will speak. Maybe my granddaughter's granddaughter. I sat there for a long time, holding that sentence. They had stolen our family's land. Not just a plot or two, but acres. Samuel had documented it all, complete with maps, dates, names. The original deeds were in the box, carefully folded and notarized. What Ethan got? A sleek apartment with exposed brick. What I had? Proof. A stolen legacy. And suddenly, I saw it clearly. Grandma Grace hadn't just left me a house. She had entrusted me with the truth. Our family had once owned over 80 acres of Springwood. Land that now housed expensive cabins, a resort retreat, and a nature preserve built by a company called Brookfield Holdings. Land they claimed had no legal owners on record. But the record was here. In my lap. The next day, I took a bus into the nearest town with a courthouse and quietly requested access to property records. I spent hours comparing maps, dates, and signatures. Everything matched. Brookfield Holdings had bought the land at auction 30 years ago, but the original seizure was built on fraudulent documents and conveniently missing deed filings. My great-great-grandfather's name had been erased. And now, I had the receipts. I didn't rush. I took my time. I photocopied everything, consulted a legal aid organization for land restitution cases, and reached out to a historical land rights attorney in Boulder named Yvette Price. When she saw the documentation, her eyes widened. Alma, if what you're showing me is legitimate, and it looks damn legitimate, this isn't just a case. It's a powder keg. She told me we'd move quietly. File papers. Begin the process. And if needed, go public. I nodded. I wasn't afraid. Because this wasn't just about land anymore. It was about memory. About justice. About standing in a space the world told me I wasn't worthy of, and saying, loud and clear, I belong here. The lawsuit was filed quietly. No press. No social media. No family phone calls. Just a woman the world once overlooked walking into a courthouse with history in her hands. Yvette, the attorney from Boulder, took it seriously from day one. We're not just suing for restitution, she told me as we sat across from each other in a tiny legal office 2 towns over. We're suing for damages, fraud, and historical erasure. And you? You're not just a claimant. You're the heir to something powerful. The documents we submitted were airtight. My great-great-grandfather's deed was real. The land had been stolen. And now, the company that built $1 million eco-retreat on that land was about to learn what it meant to be haunted by the past. Still, I kept it quiet. Springwood was peaceful, and I wasn't ready to set the town buzzing. I spent my days restoring the library, sweeping the porch, and baking old family recipes from Grandma's battered cookbook. And every morning, like a ritual, I opened one of her letters and read a piece of her heart. She'd written dozens, each one more revealing than the last. Some were filled with simple memories, like the smell of cinnamon in the kitchen during snowstorms or the way I used to fall asleep against her chest while she read to me. Others were more painful, how her father had hidden his own literacy to protect the family, how she'd spent years trying to keep the history from being erased by time, fire, or worse, indifference. You were always the quiet one, Alma, one letter said. But you never looked away. You never pretended not to feel. That's the kind of strength the world doesn't see until it's too late. And I was beginning to believe her. One evening, as I was finishing a repair on a cracked window frame, I heard a knock at the front door. I opened it to find Harold, holding a folded newspaper. You might want to see this, he said, handing it to me with a look that was half pride, half warning. There, on the front page of the regional business section, was the headline. Historic land ownership challenged in Springwood, local woman claims fraud in 80-acre dispute. My heart stopped. Below the headline was a blurry photo of the land just behind the house, where wildflowers now grew across what used to be our family's northern field. The article didn't mention my name directly, but it quoted court filings and mentioned a descendant of Samuel Walker. The comments were mixed. Some called it righteous. Others called it greedy. And then my phone started ringing. Ethan. I ignored the first call. And the second. But by the third, I answered. Alma, what the hell is this? His voice was sharp. Cold. A far cry from the smooth tone he used when he offered to swap inheritances. You're suing a company? Over some piece of dirt in the middle of nowhere? I was calm. I'm not suing over dirt, I replied. I'm suing over history. Over what was taken from our family. From Grandma. From Samuel. He scoffed. Jesus, Alma. You can't seriously think this is going to lead anywhere. Brookfield Holdings will bury you. I don't think they will. What are you even going to do with the land? You going to start a farm? Build a library out of sticks? The venom in his voice didn't faze me anymore. I'm going to restore it. Preserve it. And make sure the truth doesn't die in a forgotten basement. There was silence on the line. Then, he muttered, You've changed. No, I said quietly. You just never looked closely enough to see who I really was. I hung up. And I didn't regret it for a second. A week later, everything changed. Yvette called with urgency in her voice. Alma, I just got confirmation. The judge has scheduled a preliminary hearing. But more than that, Brookfield just offered a settlement. My breath caught. A settlement? Yes. A big one. They're scared. They want to avoid discovery, press, all of it. They're offering $2.7 million to walk away. I didn't speak. Because suddenly, it hit me. This wasn't about money. Not really. This was about the people who told me I'd never amount to anything. Ryan. Ethan. Even parts of myself. I asked Yvette to give me 48 hours to think. That night, I walked the fields behind Grandma's house. The moon was full, and the old tree swayed in the wind like it was whispering secrets only I could hear. The wind carried the faint scent of thyme from Grandma's herb garden. I knelt beside it, hands brushing over the soft dirt. She could have sold the books. Burned the documents. Buried the truth. But she didn't. She saved it. For me. For this. I called Yvette the next morning. I'm not taking the settlement, I said. Silence. Are you sure, Alma? That's life-changing money. I know, I said. But I'm not here to trade history for cash. I want the land back. All of it. Her voice was quiet. Then we fight. And we did. The hearing was brutal. Brookfield's lawyers tried to paint me as a money-hungry opportunist. They suggested the documents were forged, the history exaggerated. But every time they pushed, Yvette pushed harder. We showed the original deeds, the journals, the letters, the notarized exchanges from 1893. We proved a pattern of systemic land theft from black families across the region. We showed how Brookfield's founders had ties to the local office that lost the original filings. And the judge? He listened. Intently. At the end of the hearing, he didn't issue a ruling. But he said something I'll never forget. This case deserves more than a backroom settlement. It deserves daylight. And that meant discovery. Public filings. Press. Truth. And just like that, my story wasn't mine anymore. It was bigger. News outlets started calling. A documentary crew from a historical justice foundation emailed asking to visit Springwood. Civil rights groups began reaching out with offers to help amplify the case. And suddenly, I was no longer the woman with nothing. I was the woman who found everything in a house the world had laughed at. The weeks that followed the hearing felt like standing at the edge of a storm, except this time, I wasn't afraid. I had already survived the quiet thunder of being overlooked. Now, I stood grounded, unshaken, while the world finally turned to look my way. And they were looking. The case was no longer just buried in regional business columns. Now, national media outlets picked it up. They called it the hidden heir of Springwood. They used words like historic and landmark. A New York Times reporter came to interview me, and I watched his eyes widen as I walked him down into the library. He touched the spines of books as if they were made of gold. And in a way, they were. One night, I stood in the yard beside the old maple tree, staring at the house lit warmly behind me. I heard footsteps crunching the gravel path and turned to find Harold approaching with his usual slow, careful steps. "You've turned this place into something real again," he said, tipping his cap. "It was already real," I smiled. "I just uncovered it." Harold pulled something from his coat pocket, a wooden plaque, freshly carved. He handed it to me without a word. I read it aloud, Walker Legacy House, 1889. My throat tightened. "You built it back up, Alma. Might as well give it the name it deserves." I hugged him, something I'd never done before, and he stood stiff as a board until finally patting my back once, muttering, all right, don't get sentimental now." But I was sentimental. And proud. And humbled. And then Ethan came back into the picture. This time, not through a phone call, but through a lawyer's letter. A cease and desist. He claimed I was defaming the Walker family's reputation by involving our great-great-grandfather's name in controversial historical claims. I stared at the letter for a full minute in disbelief. Then, I called Yvette. "Do I even need to take this seriously?" I asked. She snorted. "No. It's hot air. The press is making him nervous. He probably thought you'd be a footnote by now." But I wasn't. Not anymore. Instead of backing down, I issued a public statement. I didn't name Ethan, but I spoke about the pressure from within my own family to stay quiet. I talked about being told I was less than. About how the house had given me more than any inheritance of glass and chrome ever could. That statement went viral. People wrote in from across the country. Some thanked me. Some told similar stories. Some had never heard about land theft from black families and were just now waking up to it. One woman, an elderly historian from Georgia, sent me a handwritten letter. "Your great-great-grandfather's name deserves to be remembered, not erased. Thank you for reminding us that legacy isn't always loud, but it's always sacred." I read that one over and over. Even the people of Springwood, those who had once eyed me with polite curiosity, began to change. One afternoon, I found a group of middle school kids sitting on my porch, reading books I'd left out in a wooden crate labeled Free History. I stood in the doorway, too choked up to interrupt. "Is it true this house was almost torn down?" one of the boys asked, wide-eyed. "It's true," I said softly. He shook his head. "That would have been stupid. This place is cool." Cool. That was when I knew my grandmother's legacy wasn't just safe, it was alive. That night, I opened another of her letters, the final one I hadn't dared to touch yet. The envelope was thicker, the handwriting more fragile. Inside was a single sentence. "When they tried to bury us, Alma, they didn't know we were seeds." And with it, a document. A signed letter from a private trust she'd set up years before, transferring ownership of the surrounding 3 acres directly to me. Not just the house. But the woods. The creek. The land I once thought useless. It was worth far more than I had imagined. Not in dollars. In stories. Injustice. Impermanence. And I knew exactly what I was going to do with it. I reached out to the Colorado Historical Society, and then to a regional museum. Within a few weeks, we'd formed a coalition to help preserve the house and the underground library as a community archive and educational center. We called it the Walker Memory Foundation. And yes, Ethan tried to protest. He sent another lawyer letter demanding his fair share. This time, I didn't bother replying. Yvette did. Her response was a single line. My client is not obligated to share what you never cared to value. And that shut him up. Ryan, my ex-husband, also called once. He left a voicemail, slurring slightly, drunk, angry, bitter. You really think all this makes you special now? That you're worth something? Don't forget who you are, Alma. But I had remembered. And it wasn't who he thought. I was a keeper of stories. A rebuilder of homes. A daughter of the very soil they tried to erase. I deleted the voicemail without a second thought. And sat back down at my desk in the library, surrounded by the smell of old paper and time, as the evening sun bathed the shelves in gold. The first tour group arrived on a Saturday morning. They were students, local kids from the county school, backpacks bouncing, eyes wide as they stepped inside the newly restored library basement. The moment they entered, their chatter died into silence. There was something sacred about the air down there. Even they felt it. I led them through slowly, pointing out rare books, showing Samuel Walker's journals encased in glass, even pulling out one of Grandma Grace's letters to read aloud. The room was dimly lit, softly golden, the kind of light you associate with memory. And as I watched the children press their noses to the displays, I felt something bloom in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. Pride. Not because of the attention. Not because people were finally listening. But because I was doing exactly what Grandma had prepared me for. I was giving voice to what had once been silenced. By noon, local reporters arrived to cover the launch of the Walker Memory Foundation. They interviewed me on the porch, their cameras scanning the crisp new sign Harold had hung beside the door. This used to be the house people whispered about, I told one reporter. Now it's the house where we listen, where we remember. She smiled, nodding, but I saw the shimmer in her eyes when she stepped inside and saw what we had preserved. That same afternoon, I got another call. This time, it wasn't Ethan. It was someone from Brookfield Holdings. A polished, too smooth voice introduced himself as Mr. Reese, one of the senior legal consultants. He was calling out of courtesy, he said, to inform me that the board was reconsidering their approach to the case. I knew what that meant. They were scared. The media attention. The precedent the lawsuit could set. The viral article about stolen black land going back to court with century-old receipts, it was becoming too much to ignore. We'd like to extend a new offer, he said. A buyout. You retain the house, but we compensate you in full for the land, plus bonus value. A peaceful resolution. I could almost hear the smile behind his voice, the assumption that I would jump at a number. But I didn't. I leaned against the doorframe, eyes on the children still running in the field beyond the house, tracing their fingers through the wildflowers that had grown up where fences once stood. Mr. Reese, I said slowly, you're offering to buy something I didn't just inherit, I reclaimed. He hesitated. Yes, well, compensation can be quite persuasive. I'm not selling, I said. I'm preserving. You'll see us in court. His voice hardened. You're turning down a settlement that could make you independently wealthy. I already am, I said. Independent. That's enough. Then I hung up. That night, I returned to the old letters, reading one more from Grandma I hadn't yet opened. It was dated just weeks before her passing. Alma, if they ever come offering money, remember this, wealth fades. But a name? A story? That's eternal. Let the land speak. And you? Keep listening. I clutched the letter to my chest. That same week, Yvette called again. Her voice this time was electric. Alma, prepare yourself. The judge issued a ruling on the first phase of the case. And we won. My legs gave out and I sank into the chair. You mean? They're forced to acknowledge the historical evidence. The court officially recognizes the original Walker land deeds. Brookfield's claim to the property has been invalidated pending further review. We're not finished. But this is a landmark decision. You just made legal history. I covered my mouth, breath shaking. You did it, Alma, Yvette whispered. You really did it. I didn't answer right away. I was staring at the wall across from me, at the framed photo of Grandma Grace holding me in her apron, her eyes looking straight at the camera, calm, loving, certain. I whispered to her, we did it. The days that followed moved quickly. Restoration grants poured in. Offers to turn the field into a cultural heritage park arrived. A university offered to partner with the Walker Foundation for research into African American homestead preservation. But even in the chaos of progress, I didn't forget the quiet moments. I still rose early to sweep the porch. Still baked bread using Grandma's handwritten recipes, the ones she had scribbled on yellowing index cards. Still walked to the maple tree at dusk and thanked the roots beneath my feet. Ethan, of course, tried to spin things. He gave a half-hearted apology on social media about family misunderstanding and how his sister's passion had inspired him. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because for once, I wasn't trying to prove anything to him or anyone. I had already proved it to myself. One afternoon, as the golden hour spilled across the fields, I sat on the porch with Harold and Mrs. Mary, sipping sweet tea, listening to the birds. Mrs. Mary leaned over and said, you know, Alma, this house, what you've done with it, it's more than history. It's healing. Harold grunted in agreement. You're a damn anchor now, that's what you are. I smiled, letting the words settle like sunlight on my skin. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing anyone's approval. I wasn't surviving someone else's expectations. I was home. And not just in the house. In my heart. Months passed, and with each one, the land came further alive. Where weeds once strangled the old fields, wildflowers now bloomed in deliberate patterns, paths winding through them like poetry in motion. Where the house had sagged inside, it now stood tall and proud, painted in the same soft eggshell color Grandma once used, the porch polished and humming with visitors. But the most profound transformation wasn't outside. It was in me. The girl who used to cry quietly in her room, who shrunk in the shadow of others, had become a woman who spoke on stages, who was invited to panels on historical land justice, and who, on more than one occasion, received standing ovations she never asked for. Still, the part of me that mattered most remained the same. Grounded. Quiet. Steady. Because I knew, above all, I was a keeper of something sacred. The case with Brookfield Holdings didn't just end, it ignited. Our court victory forced the company to return the remaining acreage and issue a public apology. The story of the Walker land theft became part of university curriculums. A National Journalism Award was given for the feature story about it titled Buried Truths, The Land They Tried to Forget. As for Ethan? He went silent. After a while, I think he realized something his money couldn't buy, legacy. He didn't attend the dedication ceremony the day the Walker Memory Foundation officially opened to the public. But I wasn't bitter. I didn't need him there. The mayor came. Local clergy came. Teachers. Grandparents. Children. And before the ribbon was cut, I stepped onto the small wooden stage beneath the old maple tree, the very one that had hidden the truth for over a century, and I read aloud the final letter from Grandma Grace. Her voice echoed through mine, strong and steady. To those who inherit truth, protect it. Let it guide you when the world says you are small. Let it remind you that your roots run deeper than their concrete. And when the wind howls against you, remember, you were planted to grow, not to break. When I looked up, the crowd had gone still. Even the breeze held its breath. I saw tears on faces. Smiles. Some hands pressed over hearts. And just beyond the crowd, I swear, I saw her. Just for a moment. Standing by the porch steps. Wearing her apron. Her hair in a bun. Watching me with that proud, quiet look that used to wrap around me like a blanket. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I simply nodded. And the breeze picked up again, rustling through the leaves like applause from the sky. That evening, I sat alone on the porch, a soft quilt across my lap, sipping chamomile tea while the stars appeared one by one. The house behind me was lit warm with life. Inside, volunteers sorted books. A young student named Marcus, who said he wanted to become a historian just like Samuel Walker, was already drafting his first research paper at the old kitchen table. The door creaked open, and Mrs. Mary poked her head out. "You coming in, Alma?" "Just a minute," I said. She smiled and left me there. And I breathed. Deeply. Fully. The night air carried the scent of time, the distant hum of children playing, and somewhere in the quiet, my grandmother's memory. I had reclaimed more than land. I had reclaimed my voice. My worth. My name. And I had done it not by yelling or demanding, but by listening. Preserving. Becoming exactly what my grandmother always knew I was meant to be. Not the quiet girl who disappeared behind louder people, but the woman who quietly made history. Alma's journey reminds us that legacy isn't measured in dollar signs, but in stories, in truth, in resilience. What was once mocked, dismissed, or forgotten can rise again, stronger, louder, more enduring than anyone expected. They tried to bury her, but they didn't know she was a seed. If Alma's story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to Revenge Echoes for more stories where truth finds its voice, and power finally answers silence.